All right, we are right at 11 o'clock, so we will go ahead and get started. So first, happy Monday morning and welcome to Trending Conversations in Food Production. My name is Alan Reed. I'm the Executive Director of the Chicagoland Food and Beverage Network, and I'm thrilled to be here with the Intel Distillery staff from Bader Rutter. What we do is every Monday morning, we sort of do a rundown of the trending conversations in food, beverage, agriculture, and manufacturing from the prior week. And again, this is through a terrific social media listening tool, which I know the Intel Distillery team will give us in just a moment. So first, using the fancy buttons on your Zoom, would you please raise your hand if this is your first Chicagoland Food and Beverage Network event? I see lots of familiar names, I think, that are just playing with raising their hand, but that's okay. We welcome all of you. So glad you're here. Terrific, terrific. So as always, we would rather that we be serving you some breakfast and eating like a muffin and some coffee together. But under the circumstances, we're just happy to kind of bring this community together on an ongoing basis this way. As many of you know, Chicagoland Food and Beverage Network is a mission-driven industry organization. Our job is to bring together the food and beverage industry of the greater Chicagoland area and sort of leverage that incredible power of this amazing industry of 4,500 food and beverage companies here in town and 130,000 people working to keep the industry and economy rolling, to keep people fed. And it's important every day, but it's especially important in days like those that we're living through now. Our ongoing mission is to grow the industry, grow the local economy, and create jobs. Again, things that couldn't be any more important than they are today. Whoop, there we go, next slide. Some of you may have heard, although many more of you probably haven't, about Bigger Table. Bigger Table is a new nonprofit that we've just launched to bring together Chicagoland's many food and beverage industry companies to address really specific community challenges. Two of those that are incredibly important now are food insecurity and unemployment. We are doing quite a bit on an ongoing basis to ensure that our food banks have what they need in these quickly changing and very, I'll say, strange and confusing days we're living through right now, have what they need to make sure that people are fed. And some terrific projects coming up, which we'll be happy to report on as those begin to take some shape. If you are social media inclined, the conversation starts here, but we also love to take it into social media. All of our terrific tags are here. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, et cetera, et cetera. All of that listed here, and be sure to reach out to the folks at Bader Rutter as well. Always great insights coming from Intel Distillery and other places. I'll also say, to keep that conversation rolling, feel free to use both the chat and the Q&A feature. We do check them throughout. We want this to be as interactive as possible. And again, we sort of, we all want to bring everyone together. We find that chat and Q&A feature is probably the best way to do that. Otherwise, everyone sees what everybody else is eating for breakfast. And if you've been in your pajama shirt a little while, we don't want to see that. But we are happy that you're all here with us. And with that, I will turn it over to Dennis and the Bader Rutter team. Dennis.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, and welcome to this week's Monday at 11. You know, we do a weekly scrape of the leading voices in the food production system and what they're talking about, the topics and trends. And this week, it is really centered around the supply chain, specifically around the breakdowns in the supply chain. And let me just call up our pretty screen here. The broken links in the supply chain. There have been a lot of stresses on it and a lot of breakdowns. And you know, if you happen to watch the very important Who, you know, Together at Home benefit concert, you heard J-Lo speaking how we're all people who need people. And I think it's even one small anecdote. This strategic stockpile in Vietnam, one of the leading rice exporters, has been absolutely decimated as the global panic buying has led to just this run on rice. So we're seeing that kind of small anecdote everywhere in the world, and there are just so many stories. So to start this, we want to start with a industry very close to us here at Bader Rutter, and that would be the meat industry. And for that, let's go to Betsy Rado. Betsy?
Great, thanks, Dennis. Can you hear me?
Indeed.
Awesome. Hey, everyone, and happy Monday. So as Dennis said, last week was really a pivotal week for the meat industry. With increasing numbers of plant workers or of meat plant workers diagnosed with COVID, major companies including Smithfield, Tyson, JBS, and Cargill announced shutdowns, and some even reporting COVID-related deaths among their employees. So pretty serious, very serious business. The New York Times reported over the weekend, just to give it some perspective, that in an industry like the meat industry that's consolidated, it has a consolidated nature to it, very integrated, that shutting down one plant even for a few weeks is like closing down an airport hub. So it gives you a little bit of perspective on the scope. So with more than a dozen plants closed temporarily or indefinitely, and with more perhaps even running at reduced capacity, this bottleneck that's being created is really starting to be felt. So as we look at the farm side of the business, this disruption is leaving farmers and ranchers in a pretty dire situation because they have nowhere to send their animals. So it's not just about animals who are at market weights and ready to go to the plants. It actually goes further down on the farm side. It's the piglets who are at farrowing or nursery barns who need to move out of those barns and into others. So there is a pretty significant and extensive flow issue that's being impacted, and that's why farmers are feeling these effects pretty quickly. Excuse me. So as we look at this marketplace dynamics of processing fewer animals, there will be a push on wholesale prices and retail prices to go up, and live cattle prices and hog prices especially will go down as a result. And that is according to a report, I think last week, Purdue University ag economist Jason Lusk published a really nice kind of explanatory piece on that dynamic. In addition, we saw the National Cattlemen's Beef Association report estimates of cattle losses to be around just over 13 billion at this point. And the pork industry also estimates losses of being at around 5 billion. The National Pork Producers Council president last week said, this structure of having this just-in-time inventory system really does leave farmers with tragic choices to make. Kind of an interesting, unexpected dynamic, but adding insult to injury, turkey producers in South Carolina are working to stop a confirmed case of avian influenza from spreading. That said, poultry producers in Mississippi actually fared better when the pretty damaging tornadoes moved through over the Easter holiday. Those operations didn't seem to be quite as impacted. As we look at the grocery side of the industry, the National Grocers Association is warning consumers that certain items, including meat, could be temporarily out of stock as potentially more food manufacturing operations could be impacted. And Feedstuffs actually reported this morning some IRI data that dollar gains for total meat sales are up 18.5% over the same period last year. So they're seeing really record amounts of meat sales, as a result of all the purchasing at retail. And again, this ripple effect, especially on the farming side, could be felt for months to come. I just end some comments by saying, looking ahead, meat companies will, continue to evaluate mitigation strategies to keep their employees safe and healthy, and of course, keep their operations running if they can. You know, these efforts are also involving local and state governments who, you know, have a vested interest with their own states to keep businesses running, but they're also putting pressure on companies where they need to close them if they are considered hotspots or need to be shut down. So interesting things happening for sure, and we'll keep tracking it.
Fantastic. Betsy, there was a question from Charlie Baggs who is just asking, why can't meat producers just let the animals live a while longer and grow just a bit until the processing opens back up?
Great question, and that's actually being discussed a lot in the industry right now. There are ways that farmers can, yes, hold on to animals longer, change their diets, get them to grow slower. But those measures are only going to be, you know, effective for a certain amount of time. So if this disruption passes sooner than later, those tactics could be very effective. But if this has any kind of prolonged effect, you know, those will not, you know, there will be less interventions that farmers can use.
And actually, unrelated question, Tracy Bush asked, just curious why some food products can't be donated versus dumped. And I think actually Kyle can talk to this about another thing, you know, why are we dumping such as milk? It seems like such a terrible waste.
Yeah, I guess I can use that to transition into the supply chain here.
Okay.
So one of the issues is it's that a lot of these places have a normal destination they're going for. You know, supply chain feeds from the farm to the restaurant or to your retail. And yeah, there are a lot of steps along the way. But one of the issues is that it costs money to send your milk somewhere. It costs money to send your produce somewhere because you have to, you know, hire a trucker to take it. And if you don't have your usual buyer, then a lot of times you don't know where to send it to, and then you also have to pay to send it to you don't know where. So for something that only lasts a couple days without in whatever storage they have, so like milk can only be refrigerated for a few days before you want to transport it somewhere to be processed and pasteurized, then it's easier to get rid of the old supply before you have the new supply that comes in and will last longer. And it is tragic that that sort of thing happens, but it very much comes down to like, what can we afford to ship? What can we make arrangements to ship? And when can we do that? So, and as much as we've heard all these terrible stories about, you know, dumping milk and like the meat supply being limited, last week the Agriculture Secretary, Sonny Perdue, had a big press event where he basically just came out and said, hey, look, folks, we have plenty of food. We don't have to worry about starving. And for some in the industry, you know, it didn't feel great, but the point is very real. We do have a lot of stocks. And I know as much as recently as like 4 months ago, we were reporting that we had record cheese stocks. So, you know, if we go into those refrigerators, we've got enough food to cover things. It might just be different from the food we've been eating in recent times. So another like big part of this is that with restaurants closed, you lose a lot of the kind of farm to table connection. And so in cities, especially here, like Chicago, a lot of the nicer restaurants you're going to go to are going to they're going to have that big claim. They're going to say, like, we work with local farmers. We work with these people we have relationships with. And a lot of times that is your more like niche producers, people who are making things like turnips or organic producers a lot of time, free range producers. So we did have a question early on to address this from Donna, I believe. One of the struggles that organic producers are having is that normally they sell at a premium and they can sell directly to restaurants. But right now when that supply chain breaks down a little bit, and people are looking for the cheapest food they can get to feed their families when they've just been laid off, it's creating excess supplies of organic food, which has not been great for their bottom line. And kind of to reiterate all of that, not necessarily for organic, but more on the side of like people having extra farm supplies and food that they can't get rid of. There are potato farmers who are literally just telling people, if you can get to my place, you can take any potatoes you want. So like farmers they're trying to get stuff to people. And just last week, so the Farm Bureau Federation and Feeding America, which is an association of a bunch of food banks, sent a letter to the Agriculture Secretary asking for him to help have the USDA create programs where it would effectively incentivize people with money to be able to ship their food from farms to food banks to help fill some of those needs in the supply chain. And Friday afternoon, the Secretary did announce that they came up with a sort of platform for that. So there is some progress there, which is good to know. And additionally, some groups, like some trucking companies, have announced that if you're sending food to a food bank, they will just cover the cost, which is great. You're seeing a lot of different facets of the industry pick up that kind of stuff. Which brings me to truckers in general. So transportation is not yet the weak link. I know we've mentioned in the past that we're watching out for this. But right now, a lot of the reports we're seeing, especially like farm side and getting existing supplies to where they need to be along the supply chain, we've seen a lot of reports that the transportation system is working as it normally would be, which is great. That said, illnesses are starting to spread. We'll see where it goes. In the meantime, to make sure that it's not as much of an issue, the federal government has said that truckers don't need to record hours if they're taking emergency supplies somewhere. So that allows them to kind of get around usual limits on how much they can work in a week. And furthermore, states like California are lifting weight restrictions for how much like produce can be in a truck or whatever they're shipping. So there's a lot that is going on to make sure that we can still keep things moving as much as possible, even with disruptions. So looking forward a little bit, this past week, the Trump administration convened some panels, and this is for every major industry that they could really think of, but it includes agriculture and food, to think about what it's going to look like and what it's going to mean for the economy to reopen everything, to move from our lockdowns into back a more of a normal state of being. So it's interesting to see the people that were picked for these different groups, and like the agriculture group notably included Cisco, which is a food distributor. So they're kind of like middle of the supply chain, but just kind of the way that they were categorized is entertaining to me. Looking forward, they're trying to prepare and figure out what do we need to do with our infrastructure to keep these supply chains going and transition again. So I believe we had a couple questions there too. Just we're wondering, there's a lot of talk about reopening, but how is that working with what you are seeing in your businesses? Are you planning for a return to normal operations, or is this going to be long enough for the foreseeable future here that we're not going to worry about that? How do we balance those needs? What are your experiences? All right, and I do see a comment here from Jonathan saying that looking for ways to do more public-private partnerships. So yeah, this is very much a thing that major corporations are trying to do. Obviously, they can't be everywhere, and it takes time. So we like to see this when we're looking through statements from these big companies. Pepsi is donating $40 million to handle things, which is just like, or I think it might be billion. I might be saying the wrong number there. There's a lot going into this, and we look forward to seeing more of this. So hopefully that will continue.
Great. And now, we turn to Nick, who's going to talk about what we're going to see moving forward.
Sure. Thanks, guys. Yeah, it's going to be another interesting week. They all tend to go that way these days. Kind of assessing what happened late Friday and over the weekend. We're eager to keep following. Kyle hinted towards 19.
Nick, we're having some trouble hearing you.
Oh.
Now we can hear you.
Okay. Is it choppy or is it off?
Yeah.
No, you're kind of in and out. So
Okay. Can you hear me now?
I could, and now I can't. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Now, Nick, why don't you turn your video off and see if that helps your screen that you can
stop. Yeah.
Suddenly sound clear, Nick.
Is it any better now?
Yeah, it's a lot.
No. I don't know what to do. I apologize. I'll turn the video off. Okay. Just want to make the audio clearer.
Not really.
Okay. Well, just so I have my notes. Everything seems to be. I can hardwire next time, but it always seems to happen when I'm on these webinars.
Yeah. Totally.
So Dennis, can you wrap up for us just a little bit?
I certainly can. Hold on just one second, Alan. That's here we go. So basically what Nick was going to talk about, there were basically three things. We've got a bunch going on with Farm Aid. We have 19 billion, and the industry groups will be debating about that this week. There were some late Friday announcements from the USDA and AgriPulse about this Department of Agriculture program, and it offers direct payments to producers and about $3 billion in commodity purchases for distribution through food banks and faith-based organizations, putting $16 billion to the livestock industry. And commodity groups are saying that's probably not going to go far enough, and they're asking for more money. But Sonny Perdue, the USDA secretary, doesn't believe there's enough to go around. So that's going to be a big issue we're going to be watching. Additionally, one of the things we're seeing is there's a battle brewing between restaurants and their insurers. The Wall Street Journal just today was talking about how restaurants want this business interruption classified as a business interruption, and they're looking to collect on damages. That's obviously going to be a very contentious issue. I mean, sales have fallen 83% at casual dining and 34% at QSRs. So, and that's from Miller Pulse, a research firm. So we really are seeing some reactions from the industry. They're shrinking menus, they're limiting their options. That's from Chicago Food and Beverage Network's own Data Essential gave us that report. So we're just seeing this slow reopening of food service. It's going to take time. There's some very specific questions to be answered. And again, it's a fluid situation. It's changing as we go. Lastly, something Nick was also noticing was this is a 50th anniversary of Earth Day just on Wednesday. And that's usually a time that brands love to put out their ads on what they're doing for the good and stuff like that. But now it seems to be whether or not it's going to be climate versus COVID. You know, are you going to tell your stories about what you're doing for the earth? Are you going to tell your stories about what you're doing in the midst of this global upheaval? And so that might trump plastic bag debates. So we're just trying to see what happens here. Again, these are things that we're watching happen in real time. So that's everything we were going to cover. We were going to invite you to watch for our Q1 report. That's going to be coming out soon. It's free to anyone who subscribes to the Intel Distillery. And beyond that, if there are any questions, we are wide open.
There are a couple questions, Dennis.
Okay.
So one is, once restaurants reopen, do we think they'll limit their menus or add innovative items to attract customers? Again, hard to predict, but you were just saying we're seeing some changes there. I know Data Central is sort of cataloging some of those.
Yeah, and we've already seen the limited menus. We're seeing, I mean, this is all about innovation now. A friend of mine who's out in Silver Lake, Los Angeles, said basically a restaurateur there was saying, if it's not nailed down, it's for sale. They're just looking anyway just to drive traffic, to keep revenues coming in of any kind if they can get through this fallow period. And that's the challenge right now.
Got it. And I know we talked about plant-based meat last week, but again, we're still having some questions about it. It was notable in some of the photos that the meat was gone, but some of the plant-based meat remained at least in some grocery stores. So any thoughts on where do we think plant-based meat is going to be? If there's a meat shortage, might some try it? Just what are your thoughts, or what are you all seeing getting discussed?
Nick,
yeah, we saw there have been a couple of articles on the topic that we've read, and one really said it's a toss-up at this point. It could still go either way, and it really comes down to cost and how much can the plant-based companies really scale and get the cost down at a time when, again, the economy's down, people are losing jobs, they're looking for the more affordable, they're looking to stretch their dollar as far as they can. And a plant-based item still at this point is not going to let them do that like traditional proteins are. So that, and maybe that changes again if the retail prices of meats start to go up, and that dynamic could very well play out in the next few weeks here, but it does come down to a cost issue in large part.
Terrific, thank you. One other question is, we saw huge sales in grocery. Some are reporting 30 to 50% increases in March and April in total grocery sales. And not surprisingly, that's going to ripple through to things like ingredients as they're restocking and other things. Do we think that's just the first sort of panic buying and then now restocking after that panic buying? Or do we think that's going to maintain over time? I'll say just because the food service channels, the restaurant channel has been, I'll say, well, it's been hobbled, given that you can't eat out. It's really just ordering out, and that seems like it's a percentage of their business, but not a lot, but not the largest percentage of most restaurants' businesses.
Well, you certainly don't get the markup you get on alcohol sales, that's for sure, and it's which is a real challenge for restaurants. But Nick or Kyle, do you want to take this on the ingredients thing, because we have seen things certainly related to baking, but some other issues as well.
Yeah, I think if my connection is steady here, I think that it's going to be.
Nick, you're kind of underwater again. So Kyle.
Yeah, I'm just gonna not
Okay. Sorry.
Not your day, Nick. Sorry.
Okay. Can we repeat the question? I got distracted by Nick.
Well, basically, we've got someone who's in ingredients distribution is seeing just record sales. We know that's a lot of that's due to the current situation. Do we think it'll maintain for a while? Does it seem like it's just a short order blip with like panic buying, or is it, are we seeing behavioral changes that might lead to longer term rises in these kind of ingredients and offerings?
Okay. So one big economic trend is that when there's a recession, people tend to spend less food away from home. And food away from home is generally used to mean like restaurants, takeout. I mean, even buying like prepared meals at grocery stores. And people tend to buy more just groceries and cook at home. All right, Nick. So in general, when the economy is down, we do see increased sales in groceries. So I believe going forward, this will probably be a lasting effect that we see for some time. The magnitude of that is what's to be determined, right? You know, the longer that lockdowns last, I think the more time people are going to spend buying groceries instead of going to restaurants and ordering out. But if it ends relatively quickly, people might be anxious to go eat out more, and that there might be a big surge in that.
Well, and we know that that experience either way is going to change in some way, at least short term. Certainly the crowds and how we set up dining areas. Governor Newsom of California was talking about, your server might be wearing gloves and a mask. I mean, again, everyone's waiting for testing. Everyone's obviously hoping for a vaccine, but we will have to figure out some way to open and to get some money back through that industry. It's just, again, it's an innovator's open field to figure out ways to do this efficiently and welcoming that will keep the markets up.
Right. And I'll say, in response to a question we just received, as well as just building on your comment, Dennis, I don't think we know exactly how this is going to open back up.
Yeah.
In terms of restaurants in the future. It does sound like it would be a limited number of customers with some different serving practices and some different things going on. So I think we're all sort of in a wait and see mode to determine exactly how that's going to happen, but at least the initial scuttle has been limiting numbers going forward and practicing social distancing on an ongoing basis. So again, some challenges there. We are 2 minutes over, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So thank you, panelists. Again, terrific conversation as always. Keep up the terrific work. Attendees, thank you. Again, we do this every Monday at 11 o'clock. And encourage you to join us just to really stay on top of what the conversations are in social media and other places. And in addition, hope that you'll check out the Chicagoland Food and Beverage Network sort of events pages, where you can see all of the incredible things that we're doing to keep industry connected together. Thank you all, and have a terrific day and a wonderful week.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.